Hi, everyone. My name is Emma Kniep, and I'm an associate director at Fridman Gallery in New York. We're a gallery on the Lower East Side, where we're currently showing the exhibition Women at War, curated by Monika Fabijanska, is here with us today. Fridman Gallery was founded in 2013, and we currently have two locations, one in New York City, one in Beacon, where we do have an international artist residency. Monika, here with us today, is a New York-based independent art historian and curator who specializes in women's and feminist art. In 2021, she curated the critically acclaimed Betsy Damon Passages, Rites, and Rituals, mentioned among the New York Times best shows of 2021. Her ecofeminisms in 2020 was reviewed in Art in America, the New York Times, Brooklyn Rail, and her groundbreaking The Unheroic Act, Representations of Rape in Contemporary Women's Art in the US was ranked the best NYC art show in 2018 by Hyperallergic. And Monika, over to you.
Thank you, Emma. Let's do the following. I will share my screen and show you how the exhibition looks like. I am sure our Ukrainian colleagues will particularly enjoy it because they haven't seen the exhibition, but also I hope that we have other people in the audience who are out of New York or who haven't seen the show yet. The exhibition is open one more week. It closes on Friday, August 26th, so the Friday of the next week. And it's open from Monday to Friday at 169 Bowery. If you haven't seen it yet, it is the time to see it. But it will also travel. It goes right away from New York to Eastern State Connecticut University in September, from where it will travel to Wesleyan University and then to Washington, DC, and hopefully much farther. So that's good news for everybody who lives out of New York and for everyone who'd like to bring it to where you are. Without much further ado, I'll say a few words about the show and then introduce our great speakers. I'm particularly grateful to them that in all this craziness that's invaded everybody's life in Ukraine, they found time to be with us today and to speak about Alla Horska. So Women at War introduces some of the leading women artists working in Ukraine today to the American audience and provides a context for the current war. Several works in the exhibition were made after February 24th, 2022, when Russia began full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Others date from the long 8 years of war following the annexation of Crimea and the creation of separatist republics in Donetsk and Luhansk regions of Donbas in 2014. War is unfortunately central to history, and history has been written and painted by men. This exhibition provides a platform for women narrators of history and examines the perception of war as gendered. The exhibition also offers us an insight into Eastern European feminism, which are, I should say, feminisms, which are significantly different from the Western mold. It contributes to the discourse about how national identity is tied to the perception of women's role in society. And I selected artists who have specific interest in history and historiography for this exhibition, whose work is often, who very often work in a way that very consciously and conceptually comments on history and historiography as a concept. And just to explain a little bit of a context for that, I'll read one passage from my essay. As an independent Ukraine, torn between its colonial past, the unimaginable wounds of the 20th century Holodomor, 2 world wars, and the Holocaust, the aspirations of belonging to the West, and the actuality of an endemic crisis became obsessed with history. Art of the 2010s was largely focused on the discussion of whether national identity should draw directly upon the short period of the pre-Soviet independence or include the legacy of the Ukrainian SSR. The young generation of artists turned their attention to historiography, how history is written, who writes it, who and what remains invisible. Soviet painting, especially the interpretations of World War II, came into focus for many. Others organized the critique of organized around the critique of the decommunization, the destruction of Soviet monuments and mosaics in Donbas and other parts of Ukraine, spearheaded by the post-Maidan government law of decommunization. And here in the image on the left-hand side, you see the work by Alla Horska that we have in the exhibition. So that's the only historical artist in the show. She was born in 1929 and died in 1970. And let me explain why I put her in the show of contemporary art. So the line of art, I'm sorry. Oh, that's just my echo. Okay. The line of art of by Alla Horska situates this contemporary art exhibition in the context of the legacy of women's art and political activism in Ukraine. Both Alla Horska, an artist and human rights activist who was born in Russian-speaking family of Crimea, but learned Ukrainian herself, and poet and literary critic Ivan Svetlichny, whom she portrayed in this linocut in 1963, fought to preserve Ukraine's culture and language under the communist regime. In 1960, both were among Shizdesyatniki, which translates into the 60ers, a movement of dissident literati, artists and scholars who rejected socialist realism and spread ideas of Ukrainian democratic and national revival. The group laid the foundations for the realization of the right of the Ukrainian people to their own statehood. In 1962, Horska investigated an eyewitness report of mass graves in Bykivnia near Kiev, one of the places of secret executions carried out by the NKVD between the 1920s and the 1940s, which the USSR government admitted only in 1989 after the fall of communism. From 1960 to 1964, she co-created the Club of Creative Youth Suchasnik, on which, of course, our presenters will develop, the Center of Ukrainian Culture in Kiev. Svetlichny, also its co-founder, was arrested in 1965 for his involvement in the club and imprisoned for a year in a labor camp. In 1972, KGB arrested 14 Shizdesyatniki, who were accused of Ukrainian bourgeois nationalism and disseminating samizdat. Svetlichny served 7 years in camp and 5 years in internal exile. Alla Horska was expelled from the Union of Artists of the Ukrainian SSR twice, in 1964 for depicting Taras Shevchenko. I will not develop on that, you will talk about this, and for her civic stance opposing political trials of 1967 through 1970. Unable to get artistic commissions in Kiev, in late 60s, she collaborated with her husband, Viktor Zaretsky, and other artists on creating monumental mosaics in Donbas. Some of these masterpieces depicted the builders of communism, such as Prometheus at School 5 in Donetsk from 1966, while others were joyful and magical interpretations of Ukrainian folk art. These mosaics, some of which were registered as protected monuments by Ukrainian artists and activists in recent years, one of them is with us today, Evgenia Molyar, are now being bombed by the Russians themselves. In 1970, at the age of 41, Horska was murdered, presumably by the KGB. And for Ukrainian art, she remains somebody whom you can compare to the role Frida Kahlo plays in Mexican art. And there is a reason for this comparison, which you will easily see in her mosaics, which draw from folk art. Her name, like those of Frida Kahlo herself and Kathy Kollwitz, was adopted as Nom de Guerre by one of Guerrilla Girls, a very important New York feminist art collective active since mid-1980s. So if you're an American, you might have heard the name of Alla Horska through Guerrilla Girls. And what is very important, this work of Horska ties to young artists' work who are in the exhibition, not in a direct way, but I just want to signal that this is a work by Awena Grom in the exhibition titled from the series Womb. This series discusses current life in Donbas, in the realities of war, and ties to the myth of Prometheus, how miners were presented in the Soviet art. So from Prometheus to who's a Greek god who gave life to humans, making them of clay, to giving birth in Donbas today. Then it is also important to mention involvement of such artists as Evgenia Belorusets, who is in the exhibition, in the movement to save the monuments in Ukraine. This is her work about the destruction of Lenin monuments back from 2016. Let's put Lenin's head back together again. Very provocative work at that time, and I think even today in Ukraine. That's her, and that's Zhana Kadyrova's work, this is what we have in the exhibition. I won't discuss this work, of course, but Kadyrova is very well known for her works, which draw from the traditions of mosaics in Ukraine. And I just want to share this screen to just give you a sense that these works that our guests today, Evgenia, Olga, and Lizaveta will be discussing, they really have impact on contemporary art scene in Ukraine. That's enough from me. Let me just introduce our guests and they will take it away. Dr. Lizaveta German is a curator and art historian. She's a co-founder of the Naked Room Gallery in Kiev. She received her MA and PhD in art history at the National Academy of Fine Arts and Architecture in Kiev. Since 2014, she has been working with Maria Lanko as a curatorial collective. The duo organized more than 30 exhibitions and collaborated with the leading art institutions in Ukraine, including the National Art Museum of Ukraine, Mistetsky Arsenal, also in Kiev, Goethe Institute, British Council, and Ukrainian Institute. In 2015, they opened a show in Badischer Kunstverein in Karlsruhe as part of Kiev Biennial School of Kiev project. In 2016, German was a curator in residence at Liverpool Biennial. A year later, in 2017, together with Katerina Filiuk, Lizaveta German, and Maria Lanko, all together co-curated the Festival of Young Ukrainian Art at Mistetsky Arsenal, the first all-Ukrainian biennial for contemporary art supported by the state. From 2015 to 2021, together with Olga Balashova, who is another guest with us today, they tailored and supervised contemporary art educational program for artists and art managers at Kyiv Academy of Media Arts. And finally, in this year, 2020, German, again with Lanko, co-curated with Boris Filonenko Ukrainian Pavilion at the 59th Venice Biennial. Besides the National Pavilion, German also co-curated the project Piazza Ukraina and Decolonizing Art Beyond the Obvious, an interdisciplinary program as part of the international exhibition at the Biennial. Dr. Olga Balashova is an art historian, art critic, and curator of a number of projects in art and education. She's currently adjunct professor of Kyiv Molyar Business School and director of Museum of Contemporary Art NGO. From 2017 through 2020, she worked at the National Art Museum of Ukraine as deputy director for development. Her fields of interest are art of culture of the 20th and 21st centuries, Ukrainian art from the Baroque era, and Soviet nonconformist art. In 2015, importantly, Lizaveta German and Olga Balashova together co-edited the book, The Art of Ukrainian 60s, republished in English in 2021. You can order it via Amazon. And in 2017, they co-edited The Communized Ukrainian Soviet Mosaics. And finally, our third guest, Evgenia, or Zhenya, as we say in Ukrainian, Molyar, is an art historian who graduated from the National Academy of Fine Arts and Architecture in Kiev and is now a predoctoral fellow in the Biblioteca Hertziana, Max Planck Institute for Art History in Rome, Italy. Molyar works on the cultural heritage of the Soviet period, in particular monumental art. She curated a project, Soviet Mosaics in Ukraine. As a member of the self-organized legendary initiative, the DND, where she worked together with Leonid Troshenko and Nikita Kadan in the Josip Bochanchuk Museum of Art in Kmytov in Ukraine. She studies and works towards the preservation of uncomfortable cultural heritage in the context of ideological shifts. I could not be more happy to have the three of you today with us. Please share with us your stories about Alla Horska. I think we will go with Lizaveta and Olga together. I wanted to tell everyone who was lost in those collaborations that I listed. This conversation alone is a monument to the tradition of collective working in Ukraine. So Lizaveta and Olga, take it away. We don't hear you. You have to unmute yourself.
Oh yeah,
Lisa.
Thank you very much, Monika, for such a wonderful introduction. Thank you, Fridman Gallery, for hosting this wonderful show and also hosting this conversation. And of course, on behalf of everyone, I think both Evgenia and Olga will join me for paying this special attention to the figure of Alla Horska, who is indeed a very special person, a very special artist, but not just an artist, but like much beyond that notion for Ukrainian culture and for contemporary artists. And perhaps this is one of the most important and special and well-known let's say historical figures of the 60s who are really relevant and interesting and curious for the younger generation, because this period of 60s, which both Olga and I, but also Evgenia, of course, dedicating quite a lot of our time to research, to promote it, are still not that well known. It's still not a part of this like a public artistic legacy. It's not like, you know, you would ask like average cultural connoisseur saying like 60s, and then immediately you will think about, you know, number of artists and number of artworks. So there is still a homework for us to be done. But I suppose Horska will be perhaps the most well-known, the most recognizable name. So if you would really ask 60s, I think like, I don't know, 80% of respondents will think about Horska, and then actually about someone else. And there's definitely a reason for that, because Horska would represent the kind of artist quite rare also for 60s, for let's say pre-contemporary art period, who would combine all these different activities, all these different sides of her practice, which is quite a regular and expected thing, something we expect from the artists today, you know, but it was not the case in 60s. For example, you know, if you look at the practice of Evgenia Belarusets, if you mentioned her, I'm just kind of making a bridge to what Monika introduced in the beginning. If you think about someone like Evgenia Belarusets, she's a quite important example, or Nikita Kadan, yeah, of someone who really combined artistic practice with a little bit of writing, or not a little bit, but quite a lot in case of Evgenia Belarusets, actually, activism, political activism, protecting the heritage, curating, writing some art criticism even. And this is something which goes beyond saying. This is something which contemporary artists are all about. You know, no one is dedicated to one medium or one topic, or one very precise, narrow activity. But for the 60s, I would say Horska was one of the rare examples of someone whose activity, whose dedication went far beyond just art, basically. Indeed, she was and this is what first and foremost makes her very contemporary, makes her very relevant, makes her the figure to whom we want to refer to. And in the end of our shared path with Olga Balashova, Olga will actually write a piece, like a letter written by our colleague Katerina Yakovlenko, a letter addressed to Alla Horska, like imagine, like kind of to imaginable pen friend, so to say. And in this letter, a very private one and a very, in a way, artistic statement, we can understand that Horska would be someone, you know, who we need to have here by our side in these complicated times of war and of the danger of Ukrainian culture being destroyed. I mean, I believe it won't be destroyed, never ever, because it's just impossible. But still now we have a very similar situation that Alla Horska was fighting against in 60s, particularly the danger of the culture very dear to her being under the constant threat of humiliating, of being humiliated, of being destroyed, of being perversed, of being misinterpreted, and with a very strategic thing in mind by Soviets, or in our case by Russians. And yeah, I don't want to steal Zhenia's part. She will tell more about monumental legacy of Horska, but of course, the fact that one of the biggest masterpieces of monumental art, which Horska was one of the creators, are now destroyed in Mariupol, is also bitter sign that the enemy hits the most important things in the beginning, and this is something which, of course, has to be also, recognized internationally. But coming back to Horska and her life story, so I will start with giving a little bit of the context, what Ukrainian 60s were about, and we deliberately use this term Ukrainian 60s. It needs a little more of maybe elaboration, a little bit more of just so to say, more flesh has to be attached to the bones to make it a real art historical notion. But this is something which Olga and I prefer to call it not underground art, not unofficial art, but precisely Ukrainian 60s. And the reason why we're using this word instead of underground or nonconformist, which is a little bit more familiar, perhaps more popular, is because actually 60s were not about this black and white division between official and non-official, conformist and non-conformist, state-funded and completely anti-state, if you know what I mean. It was all about actually balancing between what was allowed and what was not. And Horska would be, again, one of the most important figures to understand this dichotomy, to understand this contradictory between official and non-official. So Horska, as all of these 60s artists, were actually quite tied to official art scene in Soviet Union. She was she graduated from a national what is now called National Art Academy. In 60s it was called Kyiv State Art Institute. Here we can see, if you see a little arrow, a little line pointing to her. On my screen, it's on the right side of the screen, right? This is young Alla Horska, and if you look like right up to her and a little bit to the left, the young man in glasses, exactly, yes. This is Grigory Gavrilenko, one of another like super important figures of the 60s, especially dear to me. Before the war, actually, we started to write a book dedicated to him with Olga, which we'll finish one day. Right, so Horska graduated from Art Academy in Kyiv, which was the main institution for arts in Ukraine, and she started her career with also with official commissions, with participation in state organized exhibitions, as all of the artists did at that time. No one started to be underground from the beginning. You couldn't be underground if you would want to exhibit or to develop your artistic practice. Moreover, Horska was from quite established, in Soviet terms, established family. She was born in Yalta in Crimea to a family of state person Alexander Horsky, responsible for cinema industry. He was head of Yalta film studio. Then he was after the war, he immediately received got the position of head of Kyiv film studio of Alexander Dovzhenko, and this was the moment when the Horska family, like immediately after the war, Second World War, like 1946, if I'm not mistaken, they moved to Kyiv, and this is where let's say, Ukrainian story of Horska started, because yeah, this is where she actually became the part of, yeah, she entered the Kiev, how you call it in English, Kiev like high school for arts, or something like this, secondary school, so something which you like it's not even a college, it's basically like a high school, but with the artistic specialization, where she was studying under our artist whose name is Bondarenko, who was in his turn the student of Fedor Krzyzewski. And Fedor Krzyzewski was one of the pillars of like modern art period, modernism art period of Ukraine. So he was one of the founders of Art Academy, and one of the founders of, let's say, like the new chapter of Ukrainian art, and also very much informed with, let's say, like pro-Ukrainian, I don't want to say nationalist, because it was not about political nationalism, but it was about researching the roots of Ukrainian culture, finding the contemporary way to reinterpret them, to bring them back to modern art. So this was about, you know, bringing the Ukrainian idea beyond national politics, something like this. So this was also important bridge for Horska to, you know, to kind of introduce herself to the roots of what soon will come, the like neo-modern or art of the 60s in Ukraine. So yeah, again, so here we have the picture. She is from a very well-established, Soviet-established family, Russian-speaking, of course. She's from this very traditional social realism-oriented art institute, which Kiev Art Institute definitely was. She got married to Alexei Zaretsky, another very important artist for the 60th generation, who was at that time also teaching at Art Academy, and who became also a lifelong Horska's lifelong also artistic partner. They created a lot of monumental pieces first and foremost together, and this is a very and this is the starting point from which we will have soon a figure who will turn upside down the whole idea of the 60s artist, as someone who had a very, you know, very firm, very stable background, her family, her education, her state commissions for mosaics, her commissions for paintings, which were, by the way, quite well paid. If you are as an established Soviet artist, you can live your life happily ever after, because you actually, you know, you have everything, just you have a studio, you have income, you have commissions. But at the moment, it was definitely not enough for Horska, and she began to extend her practice, which Ola will tell a little bit more about. Here, I just want to pay your attention to this beautiful portrait of Horska elegantly dressed in this beautiful hat and this beautiful outfit. I think this is a very 60s image. 60s, I mean international 60s, you know, trendy outfit and the kind of this stylish posture. What is also important to mention about the 60s generation, that it was mostly a masculine generation. Most of the artistic establishment in all the main regions of Ukraine, which were, as we actually see on the art piece by Alla Horska, which is called Map of Ukraine, where she puts like this different artistic centers. It's Lviv, it's Odessa on the seaside, it's Kiev, it's also Kharkiv, which is not here, and it is also Uzhgorod. These are the main centers where we had art museums, where we had art colleges or art academia. All these communities were mostly masculine, where mostly let's say the agenda was created by male artists, but in every community, in every, let's say, like epicenter of arts in Ukraine, there was, and this is our this is a very kind of simple conclusion we came to with Olga while researching 60s. Is in every center there was like a very important female figure. There were actually more female figures, more female artists, but they were in every community there would be one figure who would be not just important, but who would be like the point of the gathering point, the figure who would kind of, you know, conduct the electricity, if you like, you know, through the whole community, who would just bring a very important energy. I don't want to sound esoteric, to say about female energy or something like this, but the figures so charismatic and so talented and so powerful as artists that they would easily overshadow their male colleagues if they would live in a little bit in a society with a different, let's say, gender views. But what is important that none of them would be perhaps recognized as the leaders of their communities during their lifetime, but they would definitely be recognized as the central figures now. And now, if you would look at the text on the researches of most of the authors who researched 60s in Lviv and Odessa, all of them would really recognize that the female artists, these female leaders of these communities would be the strongest one. And also, this might be a coincidence. There is no scholar explanation behind it, but most of these female figures, they lived quite a tragic life and they died quite early for different reasons. So Horska, as we know, was assassinated, presumably by KGB agent. Again, it's not, unfortunately, there is no state investigation, which though I believe there might be one now, because in Ukraine, the KGB, the ex-KGB archives are open for researchers, so anyone can apply and go. I don't know about now during the wartime, but before the war, anyone, including the international foreign researchers, could apply and go and take a look at any KGB document, which made Ukraine especially attractive a country for such a research, because in Russia, who keeps, of course, the biggest archive of KGB profiles, everything is closed. You can actually research anything. So yeah, I think this investigation can be done, but let's not go deep into that. So Lyudmila Yastreb, the artist from Odessa, she died young, I believe from cancer, but she was something like in her 40s, I think. Same destiny was for Lizaveta Kremnitska, Liza Kremnitska from Uzhgorod. Margit Selska-Reich, actually she died in a quite, well, not that young, but she had a extremely complicated destiny. She was actually during the occupation of Lviv by Nazi German army. She was, being a Jew, she was sent to a camp, but she managed to escape, basically, and she managed to survive and lived a long life after the war was over. But then again, she died much earlier rather than her artistic partner and husband, Roman Selsky. And for Zagorska, we know. So again, this might be a coincidence. It's not like, we want to build some kind of a complicated theory upon, around that, but this is the matter of fact that the most powerful, both artistic and charismatic figures in the communities were female and were unfortunately passed away or lived a very tragic life. Right. So. And again, this makes Horska perhaps again very attractive, but also very accessible figure. There is so many things we can talk about her. There are so many things we can go, we can research deeper about her, not just about her practice, but about her life, her connections, the way she started to learn Ukrainian, being an adult person and being 100% Russian speaking. And it's not like she was forced to do it. It's not like she wouldn't be not accepted to certain communities if she wouldn't speak Ukrainian. Again, the situation at that time was quite different. Now, for example, if I may put a bridge to nowadays, now in Ukraine we experience a new wave of interest interest and passion for speaking Ukrainian. Many people who didn't speak it on just household basis or in private life, they switch to Ukrainian, and this is something that becomes a very important label, if I may use this word, for identify yourself as a part of Ukrainian society, as the citizen of this country in the circumstances. But in 60s, despite the interest towards Ukrainian identity, Ukrainian language in Kyiv, I'm speaking about Kyiv, Ukrainian language for better or for good was not the main language of communication. There's many reasons for that. Of course, Soviet education and this just overall Soviet context would be the first, the most powerful reason. But again, this is something we need to kind of face, that most of the Kiev-based 60s were Russian speaking. Like I would say like 90% of them were Russian speaking. And this was not something that was a problem for them, you know, let's say, or was the problem for them to identify themselves as Ukrainian artists. And then again, the Horska becomes a revolutionary person in this sense, because she was one of the first who deliberately, consciously decided to switch, decided to learn the language. And there are so many interesting like artifacts, like some postcards or letters or handmade invitations to some private parties, artistic parties made by Horska, which are now being kept in the 60s museum in Kiev, where she writes in Ukrainian, and this is a very very sophisticated but also very natural Ukrainian. It's not the Ukrainian by a person who learned it a year ago, now trying her best to, you know, sound excuse it, but it sounds like, I don't know, artificial. No, it seemed like this language was also but also very natural to her. So I will put my speech on hold and pass the words to Olga. But then, if because again with this presentation together, I might perhaps add a couple of words on the way. Olga, please.
Thank you, Lisa. I maybe add that here we see the parents of Alla Horska, who were originally from eastern part of Ukraine, from Kherson, which is now also under occupation, but they were deeply Soviet people who speak Russian till the end of their days, and she speak with them Russian all the time, and also she was just extraordinary person, as we can see, as Lisa and Monika showed us, in everything she did. In all the judgments she did, in all her statements she did, in her art. She was just so deliberate, and she was absolutely sincere in every thing she did. And it's hard to imagine that only 20 years, all her practice, all her life, took only 20 years to be for everything what was done by her. And this is for your understanding what is the Suchasny Club of Creative Youth was. It was a club which was organized accidentally by Komsomol, by very Soviet communist organization and state organization, and in occasion. It was an occasion that some delegation from Canada came to Kiev, and they just wanted to see where creative youth gathering and do something, and they just established this kind of club. But people in late 50s, in early 60s, young people, creative people, they were so they desperately need this circle. They desperately need a place where they can gather and speak to each other and discuss some ideas and share their ideas. And they took this chance, and this club started to be a platform for very patient Ukrainian young people. And this Ukrainian identity, they even even not only investigate from their past, they also create this new identity. And Alla Horska was absolutely shocked, yeah, by this Ukrainian traditions and roots, which was opened for her when she was Suchasny Club, and here is Petro Gonchar, who was the person who was very, very in know all Ukrainian tradition, all Ukrainian, he gathering all the staff, traveling to the villages, and folk art, gathering folk art, and everything. And he he make the excursion to this museum, and she was impressed how deep and how rich is Ukrainian culture, and she just didn't think about it. I think that many Ukrainian people, recent years, maybe recent decade, also open this rich Ukrainian culture to them, and we perfectly understand what was so inspiring for these young people to discover. Because, for example, when I'm working in a National Art Museum, I met this kind of people every day when they come to the museum and they suddenly open for themselves like 1,000 years of Ukrainian culture, and it's always been there, but somehow they didn't see it. And now I think, and thank you, Monika, that even in the United States, people can open the Ukrainian culture for themselves, because we were under the shadow for a very long time, under the shadow of the empire, and it was for us, like researchers and scientists, it's very interesting how people did this work into totalitarian society, yeah, into this totalitarian condition, because it's not so simple to do it even now, but that time it was very hard. So the style of course, Alla Horska was absolutely amazing artist and a very talented artist, and she was talented in every kind of sphere she touched, but she trying to combine, and she trying to invent the way of new Ukrainian art, which is rooted in tradition. Because in Soviet system, you was not allowed to make contemporary culture based on national tradition. If you want to make traditional culture based on national tradition, you have some kind of ghetto of folk arts, and you can do it. But if you would like to make a contemporary culture, you should make it in Russian language, and you should make it in a Soviet way of thinking with Marxist ideology behind it and so on. And it was very dangerous to go this way. But I think the reason that Alla Horska could do what she did is because she because of her family, because she was very confident. She and her family was, and her father have a very strong position, as Lisa said, in and well-established person. And I think that they have very, very good family relationship. And they always support Alla Horska in her practice, and somehow it make her very confident, of course, and somehow it make her not so suspicious, and she was too open, and she make her judgment so evident and so just directly talk everything what she think, and it was too dangerous in Soviet society. And this was one of the her first damaged project, and one of the project, it's stained glass window for Taras Shevchenko University, and it was demolished in 1964 because of this this simple idea from Taras Shevchenko, who was absolutely established poet, and it was part of Soviet narrative. He was very appreciated inside this Soviet ideology, but the way these young people understand his narration, his narrative, it was absolutely dangerous, and they were not allowed to bring these words to this public space art. It was, I will glorify these little dumb slaves. I will put the word on ground around them. Guard with the word, dumb slaves. It's that system couldn't allow to do.
Mm-hmm.
Olga,
I think it's the moment to give Zhenia's voice, because at some point we need to. I know that you won't be able to say everything. Horska's life is too rich to even try to encapsulate it in 1 hour. So I know how frustrated you are. But believe me, this is just to whet everybody's appetite.
Of course.
And we can come back to this in questions, or if there won't be questions, we'll come back to you. But I just want to give Evgenia Molyar the floor before we turn the hour. Evgenia, over to you.
Yes, I'm also want to continue about this decorative panel in university.
Can you stop sharing Lizaveta or Olga? Oh yeah, so that Evgenia can share her screen. Okay.
Yes, I want to talk about the art of Alla Horska in the field of monumental art. I want to say that Ukrainian Soviet monumental art is a unique and paradoxical phenomenon. This is an art was supposed to visualize and narrate state propaganda for Soviet people, but this art was usually created by artists who were not engaged ideologically and often with anti-Soviet consciousness. And today, really important to emphasize this because the stigmatization of Soviet heritage in Ukrainian society has been growing since 2014, when Russia started the war in Donbass. After the implementation of decommunization laws in Ukraine in 2015. And today, the nowadays Russian propaganda, propaganda of Russian Federation, often uses many narratives from Soviet era, from Soviet period, and that's why Sovietness is associated with Russia, and that's why hatred toward it in society is growing. And people often want to get rid of Soviet by chronological science and decrying the cultural values of heritage. So it's a good example to show about understanding of Sovietness in different time. This example with this Alla Horska work in university. This work was destroyed as ideological and true. And the next example, this is a mosaic wind, the only monumental work of Gorska in Kiev. It was created for the windmill restaurant together with Zaretsky and Plaksy in 1967. And a few years ago, this mosaic was disappeared. The new owner of the restaurant completely covered the panel with a new wall with the logo of the new restaurant. And when my colleagues and I asked him how and why they covered the mosaics, he replied that there was something old and Soviet on the wall, so he did not hesitate to rebuild it up. We negotiated with the owner for the restaurant for several weeks. We told him about Alla Horska, her biography, explained the importance of her work for the history of art. And after this, the mosaics was reopened, and even a title plate was added describing the unique this artwork. So there is two cases show how different the perception of Sovietness can be. Also, you show previous artworks. It's really title Alla Horska mosaics located in Donetsk, called oh no, it's not this. I'm sorry. Yes, Prometheus here is depict the union of miner and metallurgist, represented two leading industries of Donbass. This is a central work of the complex of mosaics on school number 5. This school was built according to the experimental project of famous Ukrainian architect of Soviet period, Josip Karakis. This project combined the progressive view of the time, this progressive artistic, architectural, and pedagogical view. The new idea of organization the school processes provided that children move from move from one room to another during the day, changing various activities. In the architectural solution, Karakis of Karakis room with different functions combined constructively, and artistic panels depicting the characters and the intensity of these activities by different natural phenomena. For example, sun, water, sun, wind, etc. Another very famous Donetsk region mosaic is called Robe. It was created for for a jewelry store. Alla Horska writes in work notes her thoughts about a jewel, comparing it to coals on fire. In these notes, she also mentions the work of Anna Sabachka-Shostak, a Ukrainian nave artist. Alla Horska was inspired by folk art as well as monumental art of Mexico. The image of this work is a female bird with smooth and soft lines, as well as if embracing a burning jewel with her body. After the collapse of the USSR, the shop was closed soon after. Later, there was a McDonald's in this building, and after the occupation of Donetsk, it was turned into a DPR fast food kind of McDonald's surrogate. And now I'm really, I don't know what now with this artwork. Yes, it's a sad part of my presentation. In Mariupol, Alla Horska team worked on the interior of the restaurant in the city center. They created 2 panels. Yes, the Tree of Life and Boreviter. Yeah, here is in a contradistinction to jewelry woman birds. We see a masculine bird, kerstel in Ukrainian called Boreviter. Kerstel bird is known for its ability to soar on the air, and in this place, right close to this mosaics, there are beautiful panoramic, huge panoramic windows with a beautiful view of the Sea of Azov opened, and these birds seem to be flying over the sea. And especially about these mosaics, Horska wrote a lot of notes about process of creating these mosaics. In this work, it's really important for her. In these panels, artists use a lot of different materials, except smalta, glass, and stone. They used some metal modules and elements, and even shlakacetal. I don't know how to say it correctly in English. It is waste from metallurgical production from Azovstal. Yes, and this material, the shlakacetal, gives a unique metallic sheen for some fragments of this composition. Yes, and after the collapse of Soviet Union, this building, the building of this restaurant, ended up in private ownership, and these 2 artworks too. And in the early of 2000s, the restaurant was closed, and the works which were created for the public space became inaccessible to public. And in 2018, with our initiative DND, we organized a project Yellow Line. The project was in 10 cities of Donetsk and Lugansk region, dedicated to the unrecognized heritage that is in danger of disappearing. In Mariupol, our project took place in the premises of this non-working restaurant. We show several projects dedicated to monumental art. Also, Liza's husband film about Evgenia Nikiforov, a documentary film about Mariupol's mosaics, but our main exhibits was this two panels. We asked the owner to open the restaurant door for 2 days, and in these 2 days, everyone could come and see real masterpieces of Ukrainian Soviet monumental art. Someone remembers that they had seen these mosaics in childhood, and for someone, these mosaics became a really discovery. And the same time, we addressed to the city authorities and to the Ministry of Culture to provide some special protection status for these artworks like cultural heritage. But on February 24, the first day, the Russian army began storming Mariupol, and battles for the city proceed until May 20. Almost the whole city was destroyed. I guess the whole world watched the heroic defense of Azovstal. Unfortunately, the enemy army eventually occupied Ukrainian Mariupol, and recently, just recently, we have received the photos of these destroyed mosaics. It's really, really huge loss for our not only for Ukrainian heritage, but for world cultural heritage. And the last image of my presentation, it is the last monumental work of Alla Horska. Grand expressive monumental panel, Flag of Victory, is located in the city of Krasnodon in Lugansk region. This city has been occupied for 8 years. Today we cannot be sure if this work still exists, but we believe that it is not damaged and will survive until the great victory of Ukraine in this terrible war.
Thank you, Zhenya. Yes, it's hard to watch at this works being destroyed. I'm very grateful to all of you for not just speaking about Horska, but letting our audience know a little bit about the complications, about how politics and history is implicated in art, and it's in afterlife of that art. Let's ask the audience if they have any questions. That's the moment to type them for our speakers.
Can I add one point? It's important.
Yes, go ahead, Zhenya.
What about this? I'm talking about works of Alla Horska, but in fact, it's all these monumental works. It's a collective project. Moreover, Horska invited not only artists to her team, but also her friends from Club of Creative Youth. The people who were threatened with political repression, and in this way, like people working on the state orders, like as artistic assistants, these people seem to receive a certain protection of from persecution. So such was her Alla Horska managerial, or let's say curatorial approach, in which she combined artistic and human rights activities. It's really, for me, it's really important to understanding the values of this artwork and her activity in this fields. Yeah.
Thank you, Zhenya. We do have questions, so let's jump into them. because it's always the most interesting what the audience wants to know more. I hope that this conversation will continue in different forums, and that there will be more publications about Alla Horska that are available here, hopefully. So Millicent Young is asking, how did the monumental works come to be made in mosaic as compared to fresco or mural painting? Is ceramic tile work folk cultural heritage? So was there an existing tradition of ceramics? How did it happen then that in Soviet monumental art it was the mosaic that became such a popular genre? Technique. I'm sorry. Yes, technique.
Lisa.
I can start, and then maybe Evgenia can also add something on top of that. So there was, I mean, there can be like a big, like, you know, big answer, like the kind of very kind of broad answer, but then also a short answer. The broad answer would be, so to say, like more kind of broad historical answer would be that there was, of course, a very deep tradition of Byzantine mosaics, which has its own kind of developed, like a local school in Kiev in Byzantine times. And of course, the most famous mosaic of Ukraine is the mosaic in St. Sophia Cathedral, which is like an absolute masterpiece, of course, of the European art. And this was the Byzantine tradition, which was brought to Kiev, and then it has got its own kind of roots, its own school, and then, as it happened with any empire in the human history, the poorer the state was, the less mosaics the artists could afford themselves, because mosaics is actually a very expensive and very complicated technique to produce. It was like that in medieval times, and it was like that in the 60s and 70s, to combine both, because it is made not from tile, not from ceramics, not from like clay-based ceramics, but it is basically a pieces of like a smolta. It's a pieces of glass melted together with the pigments. And again, the golden pigment is very expensive. The blue pigment used to be very expensive before, because all these pigments, they were of a natural origin. So it is basically like semi-precious or precious stones even. And in Soviet times, in 60s and 70s, not all the mosaics were made from smolta. Some of them were made from ceramic tiles. And actually Horska and her team, her collective of artists, they were famous for combining very different materials. So they used not just smolta, but they used ceramics, tiles, household tiles, almost like Zhana Kadyrova. They used some just very like regular house, almost like household material, like bricks, something. And in this Boroviter, this huge bird of Lade, I think they even used this very simple metallic aluminium spoons and cutlery to create some kind of special elements. But yes, the smoltus was the most important. The most important element. Again, it was very, very expensive. And if you would look at the monumental art, like in general, not just the Alla Horska pieces, then we would see that, for example, in 80s, there were still a lot of mosaic panels produced, but they were, first of all, a little bit like poorer in artistic quality. They were less expressive, they were less brave, so to say, in composition wise, but also they were mostly produced from simple ceramic tiles, like cheap, simple material. And of course, something like mosaic, like something like decorations on the bus stops or in some like village schools, they would be also done from simple materials. But mosaics by Horska, one of the leading artists, they, of course, she was someone who could afford, who could really find them, who would be trusted a good deal of budget to use real smolta. So yes, there was this kind of Byzantine school, and then, you know, many centuries have passed without mosaics in Ukraine, and then suddenly Soviet Union kind of started. Like according
monumental
to
propaganda.
Yes, according to our colleague Evgenia Kiferov, who also researched mosaics a lot and photographed them, the first mosaic, the first small-to mosaic in Kiev was created in the 30s. There is no photo proof of that. Now, there is some photo, archival photo. It was the mosaic decoration in what is now the puppet theater in Kiev, Lilkovy Theater, and by that time it was a stereo cinema. And it was decorated with smolto, and it was made by not by Ukrainian artists, by Russian artists who came to Kiev to do some commission. This was the first time, perhaps, presumably, when the smolto was used. But then, as a school, Ukrainian monumental school, like, officially started with establishment of monumental art department inside of the artist union, where they had department of political poster, propaganda posters, department of painting, department of graphics, department of monumental sculpture, and then an artist, Stepan Krychenko, established the department of monumental art. I think it was in 50s. I don't remember the name. I'm not prepared, but I think it was in 50s, not in 60s. And I had the chance to meet his son and also mosaic maker, the artist Roman Krychenko, who is himself now in his 80s. He's really not working anymore, unfortunately, but he showed me some of the notes of his father. I must be honest, I didn't dug that deep into them, but what I learned is that he would, in his notes, when he would describe the agenda or the idea of this monumental department, he referred a lot to this Byzantine tradition and to the way that the artist would depict, for example, clothes or face, or so basically how he would describe of how the Byzantine artist would use expressive means of smolto to create a very like something really marvelous and artistic. So this is when the Soviet school started. But then, of course, it was not just limited to Byzantine tradition, because Horska went far beyond that, of course.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, I just want to add that mosaics available not because of the material, but it was a new artistic phenomenon. It's a new experimental artistic solution, and they use really different materials. For example, Fedor Tetianich, Fripulia, in his monumental artwork, often use some garbage that he found it in a Kiev street and put it in a state ordered mosaics, like a member of artistic union. So it's the materials. It's not the first like a part of values of these mosaics.
Thank you. Olga, did you want to add something?
Yeah, maybe I just said a few words about this monumental tradition and Alla Horska and the circle with Sinitsa, Zaretsky, and all this group of artists. They really were interested in tradition of Ukrainian monumental art and murals, even in folk art, in traditional art. So they researched it somehow, and then, of course, all Liza and Evgenia said, combine it together and trying to invent like a new kind of new language of art. And all of this works for this plan of monumental propaganda for Soviet system, and for new kind of social architecture, which has these huge walls, which would be which have to be covered by something very beautiful and mosaic.
work.
I think that the mixture is also quite amazing because, you know, the one that Evgenia showed from a restaurant in Kiev, the most abstract one, Wind, is not really tied to any propaganda. So I love it when you see the both two faces of this mosaic style, where, you know, some of them serve the political agenda and some of them just go wild. I mean, those folk motifs are just amazing. And I will read the last question that we will try to answer. I don't know how you are going to deal with this question, but let's try. Connie Tell is asking, is there any hope for restoration of those beautiful mosaics?
Oh, yes, we never lose our hope for rebuild our beautiful country. So of course, hope with us.
Yes, and now we have absolutely amazing and great restoration team, Gurin Brothers, who actually work in several projects to restoration mosaics, for example, of Kiev river port and Kiev bus station, and in different cities. They move from one cities to another, and working primarily with the cultural heritage of 20th centuries, especially with mosaics and murals of this period. That, yes, we hope they can do it.
Yeah, and also we have a beautiful example of heritage of Andrei Bachuk and Volodymyr Melnichenko in Kiev. Just Zhenya mentioned after exile, but also maybe it's a first artist in Ukrainian practice, which was which has this support of community of independent artists and curators who trying to protect and restore their artistic practice in public spaces in Kiev. But this example gives us this hope that all other artists also have this chance.
Lisa?
No, I mean, the colleagues said it all. So yeah, there is like, of course, one big challenge is that the monumental art was, before the war, it was not a part of the officially recognized cultural heritage, which means that it doesn't have any state protection. But from the other side, there is a lot of enthusiasm coming from artistic community and from private restorers and from just private people who more and more have bigger and bigger interest in monumental legacy, and they just do miracles to reconstruct it. So we do have several very important precedents of restoring them, but also thanks to the conversations like we have today, and thanks to the project that celebrate and promote the monumental art, I hope that after the war, when perhaps the restoration of monumental art won't be the task number one for the country and for the state, we will have some external support, some private support, some institutional support from museums all around the world who would be interested in donating, in supporting financially, but also technically, to restoring that. So I do hope that we are not, we the Ukrainians are not alone here, and that we will receive, help for this the same way as we do receive it now for other, let's say, parts of the situation where the war we are in. So yes, I agree with Olga. There is always hope, and the more we talk about it, the more we underline its artistic value, the more obvious it is that it has to be restored and protected and museumified, and yeah.
Yes, I think you really touched something very important here, Lisa. And I started to think about it as we were speaking, that this conversation and other conversations like that can really help the Ukrainian government appreciate there is no better way of making your own government appreciate the art that they don't want to appreciate, but making it very famous abroad. So
Exactly.
I think that if we speak more, publish more, and make our, not just Alla Horska, because I have to tell everyone who is watching this conversation, just Google Ukrainian mosaics. There's several websites devoted to research. We're talking about hundreds, if not more, maybe thousands. I don't know whether you ever tried to count them, of works of really high artistic value. It's not just Horska. And importantly, a lot of them are works made in collaboration of artists, those collectives, right? So maybe we can through making them more desirable, more appreciated in the world, more written and talked about, maybe we can together collaborate on the work of saving them. I just have one question on my own. How many of I know about your efforts to grant them the status of preserved monuments. So before, of course, February 24th of this year, which shattered everything into pieces, and nobody's thinking about anything but war. But when, until that moment, how many of those mosaics did you manage to get inscribed into the law, into Ukrainian law, that they are actually protected as heritage?
That's a question to Evgenia, yeah.
Yes, we have two levels of protections, the national levels and the regional levels of protection. And in national levels, just complex of school number 5 in Donetsk, our colleagues Lyudmila Ogneva, maybe 15 years ago managed this this process and get this status for this complex. And just not more than 10 mosaics have the status in a regional level.
Right. So maybe that's also a subject that can be bring to the attention of UNESCO, you know, to help you protect them. Well, I have no words to appreciate that you have done so much over the past years in this very difficult political situation to protect this artworks. And let's hope they will be protected and they will be conserved, and let's hope the war will end. So I hope we can end here for today. And I hope it was just the first of our conversations. It's the last for this exhibition. The exhibition, as I said, ends next week on Friday. We had 4 Zoom conversations. 3 of them were with living young artists of Ukraine. And today we spoke about Alla Horska. All 4 of them are recorded and will be available on the website of the gallery and mine very soon. And I hope that will serve as inspiration for others to look into Ukrainian art, past and present. Thank you all. Have a good day.